My name is Maya Holloway. I was 33 years old the night my parents decided I was not worth the drive. Rain on Route 28. That is all it took. 1 second I was driving home from a double shift. Wipers going, headlights cutting through the dark. The next second, my car hydroplaned across 2 lanes and hit the concrete divider at 48 miles an hour and folded around me like wet cardboard. 3 broken ribs, a punctured lung, internal bleeding bad enough that the trauma team opened me up for 5 hours while I drifted somewhere between alive and not. When I woke up, the recovery room was empty. No flowers on the table, no coat over the chair, just fluorescent light, a heart monitor, and a whiteboard where someone had written, "Family notified, declined to come." The charge nurse told me later, gently, the way you tell someone news they already know in their body. She had called my mother at 5:40 in the morning. My mother's answer was a sentence I will carry in my chest longer than any scar. "We'll come if she dies." But here is what none of them knew. Not my mother, not my father, not my sister who was too busy planning her promotion party to answer her phone. There was a man in a gray coat who walked into that hospital, paid my entire bill in cash, and left a metal lockbox wrapped in brown paper at the nurse's station with one instruction. "Do not open it until she gets home." Let me back up. The Tuesday it happened, I had just finished a double shift in the emergency department at Allegheny General. 12 hours on my feet, then 12 more covering for a nurse who called off. A gunshot wound at 2 in the morning. A pediatric asthma attack at 4. A heart attack at 6 that we lost despite everything. My back ached. My scrub smelled like antiseptic and the burnt coffee I had spilled on myself somewhere around hour 18. But I drove home anyway because that is what I did. I lived 40 minutes outside the city in a small rented house near the river. The rain started somewhere past the Highland Park Bridge. Not heavy, just steady and cold and enough to slick the road. I dropped my speed. The wipers slapped. The lane markings blurred. And then the back of the car let go. The tires lost the road on a sheet of standing water, and the car turned sideways into the concrete divider with a sound like the whole world crumpling at once. I remember the airbag. I remember a rib going with a deep wet pop that I felt more than heard. After that, cold air through the broken window and the taste of copper in my mouth. The paramedics told me later I was talking when they pulled me out. I do not remember any of it. I woke up 19 hours later in a hospital bed with a chest tube in my side and an IV in each arm and a pain in my ribs so sharp that every breath felt like swallowing broken glass. I turned my head toward the chair beside the bed. Empty. I checked my phone on the tray table. No missed calls, no texts, just a lock screen photo of me and my mother from 3 Christmases ago, both of us smiling like we meant it. The charge nurse came in around noon. Her name was Sharon, reading glasses on a chain, the careful eyes of a woman who had worked in hospitals for 30 years. She checked my vitals. She adjusted my pain pump. Then she sat on the edge of the bed, the way nurses sit when they are about to say something that is not on the chart. "Your family knows you are here," she said. "I called your emergency contact at 5:40 this morning." I waited. Sharon looked at the chart, then at me. "Your mother said they were hosting a family event. She said they would come if things got worse." She chose her words carefully. But I had been an ER nurse for 9 years. I could hear what she was leaving out. "What did she actually say, Sharon?" Sharon was quiet for a moment. Then she said it. She said, "We'll come if she dies." The sentence landed like a second impact. I lay there and let it move through me. The trauma surgeon had written it in the chart under the family contact section. I asked to see it later, and there it was in a doctor's small, precise handwriting. "Family notified 0540. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op." That was me. Stable post-op. Not worth the 40-minute drive on the night before my sister's promotion party when there was a caterer booked and a guest list confirmed. I stared at the ceiling and did what I always did when something hurt more than I could hold. I calculated. My mother had a dining room she had remodeled 2 years ago, specifically so she could host. Rachel's promotion party was Saturday. The good dishes were already out. There was no place at that table for a daughter with a chest tube. There never really had been. I should tell you who I am because it matters for what comes next. I am an emergency room nurse at Allegheny General in Pittsburgh. I am the person who holds your hand when the worst night of your life is happening. I talk families through the moment a doctor walks out of a trauma bay with bad news. I have done it for 9 years. I am very good at staying calm. I am also very good at being the one who stays behind. Thanksgiving, Christmas, New Year's Eve. I volunteered for every holiday shift because someone had to, and I had learned early that my family preferred it when that someone was me. My sister Rachel was the daughter who arrived with flowers and the right dress and a story everyone wanted to hear. She worked in pharmaceutical sales. She was good at being seen. I was the daughter who arrived with dark circles and scrub lint in my hair and a phone that buzzed during dinner. My mother, Patricia, once introduced me to a neighbor as our other girl. She does the hospital thing. That was the whole of it. Our other girl. My father, Dennis, sold commercial flooring and came home at 6 and sat in his chair and let Patricia do the talking, the deciding, the arranging. Somewhere in my 20s, I stopped expecting the front row. I stopped expecting the birthday call before noon. I stopped expecting my mother to ask how my shift went. I did not resent it exactly. I recalibrated. That is what ER nurses do. You read the vitals. You accept the data. You adjust the plan. The data said I was not the priority, so I adjusted. I worked holidays. I covered doubles. I built a life that did not need their approval, and I told myself it was enough. It almost was. On my second day in the hospital, a patient services clerk named Lorraine knocked on my door. She was maybe 55, silver hair, reading glasses, a clipboard in one hand and a small heavy package in the other. It was wrapped in brown paper and tied with string, the kind of wrapping that looked like it came from another era. Ms. Holloway. She stepped in and set the package on my tray table. A gentleman dropped this off for you last evening. Tall, older, gray wool coat. She checked her clipboard. He also settled your account. I blinked. My account. Your hospital bill. The surgery. The room? All of it. Paid in full. She said it the way you would say someone left you a casserole. But there was nothing ordinary about a stranger walking into a hospital and paying a bill that had to be more than $70,000. He left a message, Lorraine added. He said, "Tell her not to open it until she gets home." I stared at the package. It was the size of a toolbox, heavier than it looked. When I lifted it, the paper crinkled, and underneath I caught a faint smell. Machine oil and old metal and something underneath it. The smell of my grandfather's workshop, which I had not thought about in 16 years. Did he leave a name? Lorraine shook her head. Just the coat and the instructions. She left. I held the box for a long time. My ribs screamed every time I shifted, and the smell kept rising off it like a question I was not ready to ask. They discharged me on Thursday afternoon. 2 days after the crash, nobody from my family came. My co-worker Carmen drove 40 minutes from the city in her old Honda with the cracked dashboard and a coffee in the cup holder for me. She brought me a sandwich from the place near the hospital, and she did not ask a single question about why my mother was not there. That is the thing about ER nurses. We know exactly when not to ask. My house was cold when we got there. I had left in a hurry Tuesday night and forgotten to turn up the heat. Carmen helped me inside, adjusted my sling, set my discharge medications on the counter in a neat row the way nurses do. She microwaved a mug of broth because I could not lift my arm high enough to reach the buttons. Every time I laughed at one of her jokes, my ribs punished me. A hot, grinding ache from my left side up into my shoulder blade. She set the metal lockbox on the kitchen counter. She had carried it in from the car without a word. It looked wrong there between the toaster and the fruit bowl. Too serious for the room. "You going to open that?" Carmen asked, pulling on her coat. I shook my head. Not yet. She did not push. She hugged me carefully, the way you hug someone whose ribs are held together with surgical wire. And she left. The house went quiet. I sat at the table with my broth and stared at the box and thought about the number on my hospital bill. $78,000. Somebody had paid that. Somebody in a gray coat who smelled like a steelworker's hands. Saturday morning, the phone rang for the first time since the crash. Not a text. An actual call. I did not recognize the number. A 412 area code. Pittsburgh. Miss Holloway, my name is Robert Gaines. I am an estate attorney with Gaines and Mercer downtown. I sat up too fast and my ribs reminded me not to. I am calling about your grandfather, Henry Holloway. I had not heard that name spoken aloud in years. 16 years to be exact. Henry Holloway, my father's father. The man my mother had cut out of our lives when I was 17. The year I started filling out nursing school applications. The year my grandfather stopped coming to holidays. Stopped calling. stopped existing in my family's vocabulary as anything except a story my mother told to explain why he was gone. Your grandfather passed away, Gaines said, 3 weeks ago, at home, quietly. Per his instructions, I am contacting you now. 3 weeks? My grandfather had been dead for 3 weeks and nobody had told me. Not my father whose father he was. Not my mother who had time to plan a promotion party, but not 30 seconds to call and say your grandfather is gone. Mr. Gaines, I said, I have not spoken to my grandfather since I was 17. I am aware of that, he said. Your grandfather was too. He was also aware that you would be the last to know. There was a pause. Then he asked me to mention the box. The metal lockbox was still on my counter, untouched, the string still tied. I would like to meet with you in person, Miss Holloway. There are documents you need to see. And some things your grandfather wanted you to understand before anyone else contacts you about his estate. Anyone else? He meant my parents. The last time I saw my grandfather, I was 17, and he was 63. It was a Saturday in September. He had driven across the city in his old truck to watch me run a high school cross-country meet that nobody else in my family thought was worth attending. After the race, he took me to a diner and ordered us both eggs and toast and coffee. And while we ate, he asked me about my classes, my college list, whether I had thought any more about nursing. He listened the way he always listened, leaning forward slightly, one scarred hand wrapped around his coffee mug, not checking the time, not looking at the television over the counter. My grandfather had worked the open hearth at a steel mill in Braddock for 38 years. His hands were burned and scarred from decades of heat and metal. His hearing was half gone from the noise. But when he talked to me, he was the most focused person in any room. Wherever you end up, kiddo, he said that day, wiping his mouth with a paper napkin. I will always know how to find you. I thought it was just a thing grandfathers say. 3 weeks later, my mother announced that Henry was no longer welcome in our home. She said he had become difficult. She said he had been interfering. She said it was for the best. My father stood at the kitchen counter and said nothing. And just like that, my grandfather disappeared from my life. No goodbye, no explanation that made sense. Just a closed door and a silence that lasted 16 years, until a man in a gray coat walked into a hospital and paid my bill. I met Robert Gaines the following Tuesday at his office downtown. A narrow building with a brass plate and a waiting room that smelled like old paper and lemon polish. Gaines was in his late 60s, lean, precise, silver hair combed straight back. He wore a gray wool coat, the same coat Lorraine had described. I have been your grandfather's attorney for 21 years, he said, settling behind his desk. I drafted his will. I managed his trust. And for the last 16 years, I have been the person he talked to most about you. I set the metal lockbox on the desk between us. Still wrapped, still tied. Gaines looked at it the way you look at something you have been waiting a long time to deliver. You were the first person I called after Henry died, he said. Not your father. You. That was Henry's instruction. Written. Notarized. He opened a folder. Your grandfather set up a trust in 2010. He funded it with the sale of his house in Braddock. His pension. His savings. And 40 years of careful investing that nobody in your family ever knew about because Henry did not believe in talking about money. The trust names one beneficiary. He slid a page across the desk. My name was typed in the center. Maya Ann Holloway, sole beneficiary. The man in the gray coat, I said. Gaines almost smiled. Henry asked me to go in person. He did not want you waking up alone with nothing but a bill and a whiteboard. My chest tightened. Not the ribs this time, something deeper. My grandfather, who I had not seen since I was 17, had made sure that when I woke up broken and alone, someone would be there. Not my parents, him. I called my mother before I opened the box. I sat in the parking lot outside Gaines's office with the engine running and dialed the number I knew by heart. She picked up on the fourth ring. Maya, not sweetheart. Not honey, just my name, flat, like a label on a file. Hi, Mom, I am out of the hospital. I heard. She did not ask how I was. She did not ask about the surgery or the chest tube or the ribs. Mom, Grandpa Henry died. A pause. Then, I know. 3 weeks ago. Yes. Nobody told me. Maya, you do not understand what that man put this family through. He was difficult. He made your father's life miserable. We made a decision 16 years ago, and it was the right one. Her voice had that clipped, rehearsed quality, the one she used when a neighbor asked why Henry never came around anymore. Mom, why did you really cut him off? Silence, then quieter. Do not go digging, Maya. Some things are better left alone. Like me in a hospital room, I said. She hung up. I sat there with the phone dark in my lap and breathed through the rib pain. In my experience, when a family says do not ask questions, there is always something in the chart they do not want you to read. I went back inside and I opened the box. My hands shook when I cut the string. The paper fell away. Underneath was a metal lockbox, gray, industrial, the kind you would find on a workbench. My grandfather had cleaned it and oiled the hinge so it opened without a sound. Inside it was lined with a folded shop rag. On top, a sealed envelope with my name in his blocky handwriting. The penmanship of a man who had worked with his hands his whole life. Below the envelope, 16 smaller envelopes, each one dated. One for every year since the cutoff. Those are letters he wrote you, Gaines said quietly. He mailed the first 3. Your mother returned them unopened. After that, he kept writing them, but stopped sending them. Below the letters, a folder. Inside it, a scholarship disbursement record from my nursing school. The Mon Valley Healthcare Grant, funded by a private trust. Henry's trust. He had paid for 2 years of my education through a scholarship I always thought came from the school. And at the very bottom, a photograph. My nursing school graduation, 9 years ago. The auditorium, the stage. And in the very back row near the exit, an old man in a gray wool coat, hands folded in front of him, watching. He was there. I opened the sealed envelope on top. One line, "You were never alone, kiddo." I sat in Gaines's office for 2 hours reading those letters. 16 years of a one-sided conversation with a granddaughter who never wrote back because she never knew the conversation existed. The early ones were short. The mill, his garden. A joke about his neighbor, but by the 3rd year they had changed. He had started tracking my life. Maya graduated from nursing school in May. She was in the top of her class. Maya was hired in the emergency department at Allegheny General. Maya moved to a house near the river, the one with the green shutters. He knew my graduation. He knew my job. He knew my address. Not because he was watching from the shadows. Gaines explained that Henry had subscribed to the hospital's community newsletter, which printed staff, announcements, and had asked Gaines to check public records once a year for address changes. Simple, legal, the careful, quiet diligence of a man who had spent his life measuring things twice. The scholarship records confirmed what Gaines had said. Henry had funded the Mon Valley grant through his trust. $10,000 a semester for 4 semesters. I had written a thank you letter to the grant committee in my 2nd year. Gaines had a copy of it in his files. My grandfather had read it and kept it. $40,000, paid without a word, without credit. Why didn't he just tell me? He tried. Your mother returned the letters. After that, Henry decided the worst thing he could do was force you to choose between him and your parents while you were still a teenager. So he waited. I called my Aunt Gloria that same afternoon, my father's younger sister, the one who still sent me a birthday card every year, the one who always looked vaguely uncomfortable at family gatherings like she was holding something she had been told not to say. Gloria. What really happened with Grandpa Henry? She was quiet for a moment. I heard a chair scrape in her kitchen. Your mother happened, Maya. She paused. Your grandfather confronted Patricia about how she treated you and Rachel. About the difference. He did it at Thanksgiving 16 years ago. In front of the whole family. He said it was not right. What did Mom do? What she always does. She rewrote the story. Within a month, she had told everyone. The neighbors. The church. Your father's co-workers. That Henry was losing his mind. That he had become aggressive. That he had threatened her. None of it was true, Maya. I was there. He never raised his voice once. He just said a thing out loud that your mother could not stand to hear said. I pressed my hand against my ribs and breathed. What did he say? Gloria was quiet for a long moment. He looked at your mother across the table, and he asked her why you were sitting at the kids' table when you were 17 years old. And your mother said in front of everyone, because Maya does not mind. That was the line. 16 years of silence grew from that one sentence. Then Gloria said something careful. He kept things, Maya, letters, the cards your mother sent back. He kept all of it. I always wondered if someone would need to see it one day. I went back to Gaines the next morning. He opened a second folder, thicker, older. This is the standing instruction file, he said. Henry drafted the first version in 2011. We updated it every 2 years. The standing instruction was exactly what it sounded like. Henry had written a set of notarized directives giving Gaines authority to act on my behalf in a medical emergency, a financial crisis, or a legal threat. The trigger conditions were specific: hospitalization longer than 24 hours, bankruptcy, a civil judgment over $10,000. If any of those happened, Gaines was authorized to liquidate trust assets to cover costs. Deliver the lockbox in person, and make contact. He never wanted to intrude, Gaines said. He told me more than once that the worst part of your mother's campaign was that it worked. You grew up believing he was the one who left. He said if he showed up uninvited, it would only prove her story. How did he know about the crash? I have a standing alert on your name through a legal monitoring service. Standard for estate attorneys managing beneficiaries. Your name appeared in a Pennsylvania State Police accident report Tuesday night. I confirmed the hospital Wednesday morning and drove in Wednesday afternoon. While my mother was finalizing the menu for Rachel's promotion party, a 67-year-old attorney in a gray coat was driving across the city to pay my hospital bill and deliver a dead man's box to a woman he had never met. I picked up the graduation photograph. He saw me, I whispered. Gaines nodded. Every milestone he could find. He was there. It happened on a Thursday, 9 days after the crash. I was home sorting through the last of Henry's letters at my kitchen table when my phone lit up like a switchboard. 3 missed calls from my mother in 11 minutes. 2 from my father, the first time he had called me directly in over a year. 1 from Rachel, and a text from Patricia that read, "We need to discuss your grandfather's estate. Call me right away, not Grandpa. Not Henry, your grandfather's estate." My father's father had been dead for a month, and my mother had not mentioned him once. Now suddenly there was money on the table, and the phone would not stop. I set it down, screen up, and watched the notifications stack. Patricia. Maya, pick up. Patricia, this is important. Rachel. Hey, Mom says there is something about Grandpa's estate. Can you call her? Dennis. Maya, please call your mother. 4 people who had not called when I was bleeding on a highway. 4 people who had not called during 5 hours of surgery. 4 people who had not called when I woke up alone with a whiteboard that said, "Decline to come." Now they were blowing up my phone because there was an inheritance. I listened to the last voicemail, my mother's voice, and this is the part that made my ribs ache worse than the crash. It was warm, sweet, a voice I had not heard since I was a child. "Sweetheart, we have been so worried about you. I am so sorry we could not get to the hospital. Rachel's party was already planned and it was just impossible to change everything. But we want to make this right. Come home, we are family." I deleted it. I did not call back for 3 days. I needed the time. Not to plan revenge. I want to be clear about that. I am an ER nurse. I do not build traps. I troubleshoot. I identify the problem. I gather the data. I implement a solution that protects the patient. The patient this time was me. On Monday, I called Gaines. "My mother wants me to come to a family dinner," I said. "She is framing it as making things right." But she mentioned the estate in her first text. I expected that Gaines said, "The trust is airtight, Maya. It became irrevocable at Henry's death. You are the sole beneficiary. There is no legal mechanism for your parents to contest it. They were excluded by name with a no contest clause, and the trust was funded years before he died." "I want you there," I said, "at the dinner." Gaines paused. "Why?" "Because my mother has spent 16 years telling a story about a man who could not defend himself. Now he can, not with shouting, just with the letters he kept and the truth he documented. Henry would have hated a scene," Gaines said. "But he kept those letters for a reason. And he kept the cards your mother returned. And he kept a copy of the email she sent the church congregation saying he had been placed in a care facility, which was a lie. I had not known about the email. I will be there," Gaines said. "Dinner is Saturday," I told him. "It is for Rachel. She made regional manager. My mother is hosting. She will have an audience. So will you," Gaines said. I spent the week the way I prepare for a trauma, systematically, without emotion. Gaines couriered over copies of the key documents. The trust instrument naming me sole beneficiary, the scholarship records, and the returned mail log. A spreadsheet Henry had kept for 16 years, listing every letter and card and gift he had sent that came back marked "Return to sender" in my mother's handwriting. There were 51 entries, 51 things my grandfather had sent me that my mother had intercepted and returned without ever telling me they existed. I also requested a copy of my medical chart from the hospital. specifically the family contact note from the night of the crash. The trauma surgeon's handwriting was small and precise. Family notified 0540. Mother stated we will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. I made 3 copies. 1 in my bag, 1 in my filing cabinet, 1 in an envelope I left with Carmen. Because ER nurses always have a backup for the backup. I did not write a speech. I did not rehearse. I just organized the evidence the way I would organize a patient file, chronological, documented, clean enough that anyone reading it would reach the same conclusion. My grandfather had loved me quietly for 16 years, while my mother had erased him loudly. The documents made that fact impossible to argue with. The night before the dinner, I read Henry's last letter. The one dated 2 months before he died. He had written it in a shakier hand than the others. The capitals slightly crooked. The pen pressing harder. Kiddo, I am 79 and the doctor says my heart is wearing out. I am not scared. I spent 40 years pouring steel, and the one thing I learned is that everything strong was poured under heat. You were poured under heat. This money is not a prize. It is a foundation. I did not save it so you could buy things. I saved it so you could take care of people without ever having to wonder if anyone was taking care of you. Use it however you want. But if you want a suggestion from an old man, find the ones who do not have anybody in the back row. Be the back row. I set the letter down. I knew what I was going to do with the estate before I finished reading it. The Henry Holloway Fund. Scholarships for first-generation nursing students. The ones who got in on their own and did not have a family cheering in the front row. The ones like me 20 years ago who thought a mysterious grant was just good luck and never imagined it was love in disguise. I folded the letter and put it back in the box. The drive to my parents' house was 30 minutes across the city. I took surface streets to avoid the highway. My ribs ached with a low, dull pulse now, not the broken glass feeling of the hospital, more like a bruise that was learning to heal. I pulled into the driveway at 5:47. 6 cars, full house. Patricia had invited the whole family for Rachel's celebration. I picked up my bag, checked the documents one more time, got out. My mother answered the door in a cream sweater and pearl earrings, hair freshly set, a smile wide enough to sell a house. Maya, oh sweetheart, come in. She pulled me into a careful hug because even Patricia knew not to squeeze a woman with broken ribs. Over her shoulder I could see the dining room. The table set for 12. White linen. The good dishes. A centerpiece Rachel had clearly found online. Aunt Gloria was in the kitchen drying a dish. She caught my eye and gave me a small nod. The kind that said, I know why you are here. Rachel was pouring wine at the sideboard. My father stood near the fireplace with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man who wanted to be anywhere else. Gaines was not here yet. He had told me 6:15, 15 minutes after me. You look thin, Patricia said, steering me toward the living room. Her hand on my elbow, guiding me, the way she had always guided me toward the seat she had chosen. Actually, Mom, I said, I would like to wait until everyone is seated. She blinked. Of course, sweetheart. She had no idea what was in my bag. We sat down at 6:10. Grace was said, by Patricia, who thanked God for bringing the family together and for Rachel's wonderful achievement. The doorbell rang at 6:15. I stood up. That is for me, I said. I opened the door and Robert Gaines stepped in. Gray wool coat, leather briefcase. This is Robert Gaines, I said, Grandpa Henry's attorney. The table went still. Rachel set her wineglass down. My father looked at his plate. Gloria folded her hands. Patricia recovered first. She always did. How nice, she said. Please, sit. We have plenty. Gaines sat. And then while everyone was eating, and the small talk filled the room like gas before a match, Patricia made her move. She set down her fork, reached across the table, took my hand. Maya, your father and I have been talking about Grandpa Henry's estate. She paused for effect, scanned the table to make sure everyone was listening. We know Henry left some things behind, and we think the right thing to do as a family is to share them. He was a family man. He would not have wanted one person to get everything while the rest were left out. It is what he would have wanted. I let her finish. I let the room absorb her version. Then I reached into my bag. I set the stack of letters on the table beside my plate. 16 envelopes, yellowed at the edges, each one dated in Henry's blocky handwriting. These are letters Grandpa Henry wrote me, I said. One every year for 16 years. The table was silent. Patricia's hand was still extended toward mine, frozen. He mailed the first 3. Mom, you returned them. I was not looking at Patricia when I said it. I was looking at Gloria, at my cousins, at Rachel's boyfriend, the witnesses. After that, he stopped mailing them, but he never stopped writing. I opened the letter from the 3rd year and I read 2 sentences aloud. The ones about the Thanksgiving table, about Rachel at the head and me at the kids' table at 17 years old. About Henry setting down his fork and asking why. Gloria pressed her hand to her mouth. A cousin put down their phone. Patricia opened her mouth, but I kept going. I placed the scholarship records on the table. Grandpa paid for 2 years of my nursing school through a private trust. I did not know until last week. Then I placed the returned mail log. 51 letters and gifts, all returned by you, Mom, in your handwriting. And then I placed the chart note, the trauma surgeon's small, precise handwriting on hospital letterhead. This is from the night of my crash, I said. The charge nurse called the house at 5:40 in the morning to tell you your daughter was in emergency surgery. I read it aloud, steady, the way I read a lab result to a family in the ER. Family notified 0540. Mother stated we will come if she dies. Declined to attend. Patient stable post-op. The room did not gasp. It did not erupt. It went very, very quiet. The kind of quiet where 12 people are all holding their breath at the same time and nobody wants to be the first to let it go. Patricia broke first. Her chair scraped back. She stood, hands flat on the table, the cream sweater and the pearls and the centerpiece suddenly looking like a costume that no longer fit. You are twisting everything. Her voice climbed. Henry was unstable. He was controlling. He tried to turn this family against me, and I did what any mother would do. I protected my children. From what? Gloria said quietly from the other end of the table. Patricia's head snapped toward her. From a man who could not mind his own business. He asked why your 17-year-old daughter was sitting at the kids' table, Patricia, Gloria said. That is all he did. He humiliated me in front of my own family. And Patricia's mask slipped. What was underneath was not grief. It was rage. 16 years of a maintained story crumbling in front of the people she had spent 16 years convincing. She turned to me. You have always been like this. Difficult. You think because he left you money that makes you special. He poisoned you against us. He was a bitter old man who could not let go. I did not raise my voice. I did not stand up. I stayed in my chair with my hands folded and my ribs aching and my voice level as a flat line. Gaines, I said. Gaines opened his briefcase. The trust is irrevocable, he said. Maya is the sole named beneficiary. Henry excluded all other family members by name with a no contest clause. Any attempt to challenge the trust results in automatic forfeiture of any residual claim. The documents are filed with the county. Patricia stared at Gaines, then at me. You planned this, she whispered. No, I said. Grandpa did. I stood up. Not fast. Not angry. The way you stand when a shift is over and you have done everything you can. You said you would come if I died. I lived. We are done. Nobody moved for about 5 seconds. Then Gloria pushed her chair back and walked around the table to stand beside me. She did not say a word. She just stood there, a witness choosing a side, the way people do when the evidence is clear. My father had not moved. He sat at the head of the table, hands in his lap, staring at the letters. His lips were pressed together and his chin trembled. Once, a single involuntary quiver. And I knew he was thinking about his own father. About 16 years of phone calls he could have made and did not. About a funeral he had attended and a daughter he had not bothered to tell. He did not apologize. He did not stand up. He did not say a word. That silence was its own kind of answer. Rachel finally spoke. So there is nothing we can do, legally. Gaines shook his head. The trust is final. Rachel picked up her wine and drank. I gathered the letters and put them back in the metal lockbox. 16 years of a conversation I never knew I was having. Written by a man I never knew was listening. The box felt lighter now. The way a bag feels lighter on the way home because you have set down the heaviest thing. I picked up my phone from the table. No new messages. For 2 weeks that blank screen had been an indictment. Now it was something else. I turned it face down. Let the room see it. Then I put it in my pocket. The silence was mine now. Gloria, I said. Thank you. She squeezed my arm. Gaines, I will call you Monday about the fund. He nodded. I looked at my mother one last time. Sitting in her chair, napkin twisted in her hands, surrounded by the table she had spent 16 years building. The dishes, The linen, the story, all of it intact except the one thing that mattered. The truth about who she really was. I did not say goodbye. I did not need to. I walked out the front door into the November dark, and the cold air hit my face and my ribs ached one more time. A sharp, clean ache, like a stitch being pulled, like something closing, and then it softened. The way pain does when the healing has finally started and your body knows it before your mind does. 6 weeks later, I sat in Gaines's office and signed the papers establishing the Henry Holloway Fund. The trust had been substantial, not a fortune, a steelworker's lifetime of careful saving and patient investing. Enough to endow an annual scholarship for first-generation nursing students at 3 Pittsburgh schools, with a preference for applicants who, in the language Gaines and I wrote together, demonstrate resilience in the absence of family support. Gaines framed Henry's graduation photograph and hung it in his office. I kept the lockbox on my nightstand. Some mornings I open it and read one letter, just one, the way you would revisit a conversation with someone you love. The first scholarship was awarded in the spring to a 19-year-old from McKeesport who had aged out of foster care. She did not know who funded it. She wrote a thank you letter to the committee, and I read it in Gaines's office and thought about the thank you letter I had written 10 years ago to a grant committee that was really just my grandfather sitting alone at his kitchen table, reading my words and keeping them in a folder. My mother called once, 3 weeks after the dinner. I did not pick up. My father never called. Rachel sent a text that said we should talk, and I replied, I do not think we should. Gloria and I had dinner every other week. She told me stories about Henry I had never heard, how he had cleaned and oiled that lockbox for a year before he died, how he had told her once it was for Maya when the time comes. My ribs healed. The scars faded to thin white lines along my left side. By February, I could take a full breath without wincing, a deep, clean breath that filled my lungs all the way. And every time I did it, I thought about Henry's last letter and the line that lived under everything, now like a pulse. You were never alone, kiddo. I used to think family meant the people who share your name and your table and your blood. I was wrong. Family is the man standing in the last row of your graduation in a gray wool coat, watching, saying nothing, making sure you would never fall without someone there to catch you. That is my story. One crash, one sentence I will never unhear, and one quiet man who never stopped showing up. If this reminded you of someone who loved you from a distance, or reminded you to be that person for somebody else, tell them today, be the last row. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I will see you in the next one.